All right, welcome back. We're here with Jakub from MSCI, and we've been talking about sustainable finance, and especially from an investment perspective, what an investor may look at in terms of categories or types of risks or opportunities when considering sustainable and green investments. And I know that there's a fair bit of pushback from a traditional finance perspective that investors should be looking at the quantitative results of an investment. Does it make money? Does it lose money? Etc. And the description that you gave, although extremely clear and absolutely makes sense in terms of like fundamental and core concepts perspective, it's also extremely complicated, fairly subjective, and as a lawyer, not always solely based in the law. In other words, the reduction, a company can legally pollute up to a certain amount, let's say, but a decision about whether an investment is green or sustainable or not is based often on a non-legal calculus of pollution. Let's just use it as a very, very basic example. So I'm curious, if you're talking to this broad community of learners who may look at this a little bit skeptically and saying, there's no way you can measure that, it's too big, or maybe even irrelevant from a financial perspective, what would your response be? And maybe a little bit specifically, like, how do we rate or index or quantify these types of metrics, especially when they're often qualitative in nature?
I mean, this question or concern, of course, comes up quite a bit. It's understandable why. As you mentioned, some of these things that we discussed are, by definition, maybe their nature is more qualitative. Although we try to quantify as many of these issues as possible. So maybe to give a couple of examples, of course, with some of them it can be easier. So if we are again talking about things such as carbon emissions, right, or again water withdrawal levels, even on the social side, right? If we are talking about things like we discussed, the data leaks, right? Like these are usually well documented. You can see how much of the data was leaked, and so on. So there are things that are relatively easy to quantify, and they are very important part of our assessment. Of course, then there would be some things that are more qualitative. So as I mentioned, it can be even things like the expertise on the board, right? How do you measure expertise, right? So of course, maybe to address this specific thing, you would look at the track record of the different maybe directors on the board, right? So really their CV, like have they worked in the industry? Have they worked, let's say, as a CFO before? If we are looking for financial expertise and so on, right? So of course this would be already a little bit more qualitative, but still I would say we can come to some conclusion that can be later quantified, and maybe how to do that. So oftentimes what you want to do if there is nothing else, or maybe you cannot work with absolute numbers, is to work with some relative numbers, right? So that can be oftentimes comparison to peers, right?
Sure.
So you just maybe want to rank companies again in the same industry, or with the same circumstances, whatever that means from your perspective. Let's say they make their revenues in the same way, and you're gonna rank them, right? So this one on this particular thing that you are looking at and is more qualitative, is doing better than the other one. You can turn it into a score. So and then if we want to create any sort of, let's say, financial product on top of it, which is again easier to use for the investor or any other kind of consumer of that information, it's much easier to plug in into something like a rating model, right? So this is our approach at MSCI, that we try to quantify as much of the information as possible, even if it's maybe a little bit more of a qualitative character.